All right. Hey there, y'all. Welcome to the Money Club with Lisa Duke. My guest today is Camille Pagan, and Camille has done all kinds of exciting things in the world of writing. She is the #1 Amazon charts and Washington Post best-selling author of 7 novels and a journalist who has contributed to Forbes, the New York Times, Real Simple, Time, WebMD, and many others. She's also a coach who helps aspiring authors get published and writers of all levels create fulfilling, financially sustainable careers. So, welcome, Camille.
Thanks, Lisa.
And
Excited to be here.
yay, I should have asked before we started recording, but I pronounced your last name correctly, right?
Right on. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Names are important. I don't always get it right, but I make an effort. So, of course, everybody knows, right? You can't make a living writing. So,
Story 2. Yeah.
yeah. So tell us a little bit about how you got where you are today.
So I definitely had that belief growing up. My parents are, typical blue collar Detroit area story. My dad worked his way up at Ford Motor Company, went from being pretty much dirt poor to a middle class existence. And that probably hit like middle class around the time I was in high school. So I grew up with not a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents just really believed that you could not make money writing, even though I was very good at it. It was always clear that that was my talent. Science I was interested in, but it wasn't sticking the same way. Math, forget about it. Unless it's money, I don't get it.
Yeah, isn't it crazy how we can like calculate to the penny what like the discount on a pair of shoes will be, but when it comes to, and also salespeople can calculate their commission, right? We can do math when we have to, but the rest of the time it's all very confusing. So sorry, go ahead.
No, just keep that algebra away from me. So I got a full ride to the University of Michigan,
Mhm.
and my parents, who really meant well, they were like, go do something useful, like be an engineer or a doctor. And I thought that that's what I would do. And first semester, it was just so clear that I was a much better writer than science student, and certainly engineering was out of the question. I just knew, I would kill somebody if I tried to do that. So and I was lucky because at the university, I just had these professors who really nurtured my talent.
Mm.
I still thought for a while that I would go into medicine in some capacity, and I almost went to public health school at one point. And I worked at the cardiac lab at U of M my last year of college.
Mhm.
And there was this cardiologist there, Lori Mosca, who said to me, why don't you go write about health? Like,
Mm.
you have this interest, because I am naturally interested in health. My youngest sister had a lot of medical problems when I was growing up. My family had a lot of medical issues, and I just like to kind of figure out what could it be? What was causing that? Like, what's the underlying pathology? That kind of thing.
Mhm.
But I never thought that I could write about it. Like, that just had never occurred to me. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that sounds smart. So I went to this program that Harvard used to offer called the Radcliffe Publishing Course, where you go for the summer, you learn how to edit, you learn about publishing, and then they send you off into the world.
Mhm.
So my first job was I had a very short stint at a book publisher working for this completely crazy person. And I thought, oh no, that won't do. And so 6 weeks later, I landed at Fitness Magazine.
Mhm.
I worked there for 2 years learning about everything, how to edit, but also how to write. They taught me more about research than I had even learned at the cardiac lab. Like, I just learned how to read a study, interpret it, and tell it to anyone. Someone with a 6th grade reading level could understand what I was saying, even though it was about something complex.
Yeah, it's such a valuable skill to be able to translate that down for the rest of us.
Yeah, and it's something that in the literary world, people are like, oh, really, it's often that you should make it sound fancier. And what I learned through this and then freelance writing is that no, simple is always best. It tells a better story. It gets the information out there in a more clear, concise way, reaches a lot more people, which is what I personally want to do.
Right, right. Okay, so you were kind of getting like this was like your first big girl grown-up job was on staff as a magazine writer.
Yeah.
So that's making a full-time living, but I'm guessing it's not like rolling in the dough.
No,
So how did you
um,
kind of progress from there to where you are now?
so I was living in New York, which is obviously very expensive.
Hmm.
Loved living there, was not making a ton of money. Like everything was really tight. But the one thing my parents did teach me was how to budget. Like I knew how to balance a checkbook in high school. And so I came out of there knowing like, okay, I have this much money. Here's what I can do with it. So 2 years after fitness, I went over to Lifetime, which is the television network, but they had this magazine and an online, basically an online magazine at the time. And I spent 2 years there as a senior editor, and I realized that all of the writers that was hiring, they were all making better money than I was. Or
Wow.
had
Hmm.
the potential to if they weren't.
Hmm.
And I thought, what am I doing? So this is when I applied to Harvard to go to the public health school, got in, was like, oh, I'm going to go do this thing, and had this one call with an advisor who said, what are you going to do when you get out? And I said, well, I'm going to write about health. And she's like, you're already doing that. And I was like, oh,
So that saved you a ton of student loan debt.
gift of U of M was that I had no debt when I came out.
Hmm.
And so I was able to make these choices that were very freeing that a lot of my peers were not making.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I did the scariest thing I think I've ever done in my life and said no to Harvard and went out and I was like, okay, I just did this thing. So I'm going to go make six figures as a health writer. And that first year I did.
And
I
that
just,
was freelance work, like multiple projects that you put together. How
yeah,
important was your background to getting that going? Because I know usually that's a process, right? You have to figure
yeah.
out who's hiring freelance writers, who are the potential clients in my field. So was it like kind of your existing network, or was it new people you were meeting when you started freelancing?
Mostly new people. So I did get a few clients that you have these relationships like any field where you know a couple people and you can say, "Hey, I'm out there. I'm available for work." And so there were a couple like that, but a lot of it was just knowing, well, it's two things. I talk a lot about like how to make money as a writer. One is specializing. There are generalists who make good money,
Hmm.
but for the large, like by and large, there's people who have one specialty. So for me, it was health writing,
Hmm.
health psychology, anything in that realm, I could write about it. So I build myself that way. And soon it was editor after editor saying, like, write this piece for me. Can you do this weird, obscure thing? Yes, I can. Can you do this really general thing? Yes, I can. And I mean, I worked all the time initially,
Hmm.
but that's how I built a name for myself.
Oh,
Yeah.
fantastic. So how did you know who to approach? I guess from your magazine work, you kind of knew the title of the person who might be accepting freelance people, and
Yeah.
you just said
So
like
that's
who's.
part two is like knowing how to do it.
Hmm.
So I knew how to write a query letter because I'd been on the receiving end.
Ah, yeah, that helps.
It's what you need to say in a very quick way that is going to make that person open the email and be like, oh yeah, maybe I'll work with this person. Even if I'm not buying their idea, maybe I'll give them something else.
Okay, gotcha, gotcha. So I want to pick that up because I think that'll tie really nicely to how you help aspiring writers and current writers.
Yeah.
But before we go, because that's the way the conversation kind of naturally wants to go, I want to pause and I want to tell you why I wanted to have this conversation today and record it and share it. Is because you and I have been just to catch the audience up to where we are in a coach training program together. We've been practicing, we've gotten to know each other, and so we have had a couple of conversations. So we had one conversation in which I explained to you, a full-time professional writer, that it's not possible to make a living as a full-time professional writer. And to your credit, you didn't like interrupt my story and argue with me. You were just like, okay, yeah, where's she going with this? But yeah, so that was definitely my story. I got some recognition in high school for being a writer, and everybody sort of explained to me at about 14, 15 that's just so you know, you can't make a living doing this. And so the direction that I was steered was also journalism, but it was newspaper work. And I actually volunteered for the little local high school, or the little local town newspaper that I was in. But then we had a trip in toward the end of high school where I met a bunch of journalists at the state
Uh-huh.
wide, like the big newspaper.
Yeah.
And they explained to me that you couldn't make a living doing that either. And this was before the internet, right? So if it was in trouble then. So I was kind of like, oh, okay, let me go to college and then do something where you can make a living, which is how I ended up in IT. So I had told you this whole story about you can't make a living as a writer. And I knew that you make a living as a writer. And you said one time in passing something about how much money you make,
Uh-huh.
and it was like, you didn't give me an exact number, but it was a substantial amount
Uh-huh.
of cash. And I remember and it was the same kind of thing, like it was part of another story, we were talking about something else, you just said it in passing, and I remember my brain sort of like disengaging from the conversation and going, whoa. And then, right, because in my subconscious, so I was conscious of the whoa in the next sentence, but I wasn't conscious of what the brain was dealing with. I had this belief you can't make a living as a writer. I got this data point of how much money ish you make,
Yeah.
and my brain was like, does not compute, does not compute. And the way my brain, the way my brain fixed it was, I remember saying to myself when I should have been listening to you, oh, well, she's a small business owner, and that's about right
Yeah.
income wise for a small business. So it like my brain, so the thought was conscious, but it was subconscious what the brain was fixing there. And so,
Yeah.
right, that was a couple of weeks ago. And then Saturday morning, my
Mhm.
dog doesn't understand about Saturdays. So we don't have class until like 10ish, but the dog was still on his regular schedule. So he got me up. So like I read for a while, and I'm studying this book on money mindset. My personal thing that I'm studying money wise right now is
Yeah.
earning more and limiting beliefs to do with earning
Yeah.
money. So I get up, I'm reading this book about limiting beliefs to do with earning money, and then I like go get in the bathtub, and I'm like hanging out in the bathtub, and kind of like somewhere from up in the bubble bath floats this little thought bubble of like you can't make a living as a writer, and then this other data point about how much money you made, and I'm like, hold up. so so yeah, that's why I wanted to have you on. Like we need to discuss this because this
Yeah.
is a perfect example of where mindset comes in, because I think it's hard to explain,
Yeah.
well, what's mindset work, what's a mindset coach, but that
Yeah.
that outside view of sort of what's going on in your brain, because so many of these times these things don't bubble up to the surface on their own. So sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm totally with you. I think it is a mindset thing
Yeah.
because every time I've decided that I'm going to, so let's say when I left Lifetime, decided not to go to graduate school and went out on my own, I just believed that I needed to make $100,000 in order to make this worth it. Like I just
Hmm.
made a crazy decision that everyone in my life except for my husband was like, "Girl, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm just going to prove it," which is maybe not the best idea,
Hmm.
like proving yourself, but I was young and I just believed that I could do it and I hustled until I did it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that built this foundation of, yes, you can make money writing.
Hmm.
And all of my goals that came next were kind of formed from that place of, yes, you can, you just need to decide you can.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
So yeah, I guess when I wanted to write novels, that was another area where people are like, you can't really make money doing that. And I was like, watch me.
Like it's one thing doing freelance articles for WebMD. People kind of
Yeah.
get that that makes money, but a novel for
Yeah.
sure does not make money unless you're J.K. Rowling.
Yeah. And it's a winding path. And this is what I tell people, like you have to want it for the right reasons because you may not get there right away. And the mindset work is huge. So my first novel, it was another one of these. I tell everyone, like, you can do it if I did it, because my first book was not that great, but I wrote a really good query letter. I followed a great story structure. So it had that kind of readability.
Mhm.
And I believed that I would sell it. And so I found an agent immediately, sold it for six figures. Now, the book sold like 17 copies, and there were 3 years between the first and second book that I wrote bad drafts and believed that I was not going to have a writing career. And that was when I realized the power of my mindset because I
Mm.
believed all of these other things. And then I stopped believing because my
Mhm.
book didn't sell. Most of my reviews are really good, but I got this one horrible trade review. And I guess I just made it mean so much more.
Yeah.
And I see that those 3 years were just kind of proof of that. I was still making money doing my freelance work,
Mhm.
but I suddenly just bought into this, "Oh, you can't actually do it. Everyone was right." And I had to get through that. It was like this horrible, miserable time in my creative life. And I finally gave myself permission to write a story for myself. And the minute that I did that, I started getting that belief back. And I was like, this book is going to sell a trillion copies. It's just so personal, and I think that that's the thing about creative writing, like, when you really write for yourself to market, like, you do meet the market demand, but
Mhm.
also writing a story for yourself. The book sold for a tiny little bit of money to Amazon, which was then just starting its publishing department, but my editor said at the time, she's like, "I'm gonna give you a career," and she did.
Wow.
That book has sold more than 250,000 copies. It was optioned for film 3 times over. Like, it's just out there as my kind of what brings readers to me. It's called Life and Other Near-Death Experiences.
Wow.
Yeah, and I've since written, so that was book 2, I've written 5 more, and I'm under contract for 8 and 9.
Wow.
Yeah,
Holy cow.
yeah, I love it. I love
That's
it.
fantastic. So, I am assuming this is part of what you help other writers with, correct? So, tell us
Yeah,
a little bit about your coaching and how you mentor. Because I will just say before we get into that, I'm a huge believer in expert help, right? Like
yeah,
anybody could go through the same process you
yep,
did of getting a career in the industry and seeing from the
yeah,
inside how it works and then going out and building your contacts,
yeah.
or you could just like shortcut and like, can I
That's
just give
totally
you
the
some money and you tell me the answer instead of me having to go figure it out? So tell us a little bit about what you do for writers and aspiring writers.
So I work with both fiction and nonfiction writers because one other thing that I did for a long time, before I even became a novelist, I would ghostwrite and book doctor books for nonfiction writers. So I did a lot of random projects like home decor, wedding advice, but most of them were health and psychology titles.
Mhm.
Because of NDAs, I can't tell you the name of most of them, but there were a lot of like New York Times bestselling diet series. And by diet, I mean more, I didn't do a lot of weight loss books. It was more like blood sugar, diabetes,
Mm,
that kind of thing. So I did a lot of those and then did my fiction career. Um, in terms of the mindset stuff, I I now coach people on the stuff that I wish I would have known.
mm,
They think that they're hiring me to figure out basically how to get in.
mhm,
Like, how do I write a better query letter? How do I get in touch with the right agents? How do I find the books that are good comps for mine? That's something where you want to make your book sound kind of like another best-selling book so
mhm.
that agents will say, "Oh yeah, I want to take a chance on this because I know there's a market for it."
Okay.
But what they're really hiring me for, and they never believe this until they start working with me, is the mindset stuff.
Of
Everything is about mindset.
like how to handle the rejection letters and how to handle if the book doesn't sell and how to handle when you get writer's block and those kind of things.
And just believing in yourself.
Mm,
Because I have never worked with someone where I have not seen the same pattern of initially you have this self-belief where I have a good idea, I want to bring it to the world. I know there's something here that I could help people. And the help people part, even in fiction, I believe is the root of what makes people actually write a whole book.
mm.
And that's not there. It's the person that you run into the cocktail party where they're like, "Oh yeah, I could write a book. Everyone's been telling me to write a book for years." And you're like, "Well, why aren't you doing it?"
You have to have something more than just like, "Oh, yeah, that would be fun if it took, like, 5 minutes and I could
Yeah.
do
There's
it when I'm doing something else at the same time."
yeah, there's some altruism there. Uh,
Mm,
Inherent, I believe, in the writing process that makes you sit down day after day and do this thing that can feel very tedious at times. Um, so you start off, you're excited, you're like, this is going to happen. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be a #1 New York Times bestseller. And then you start doing it. And that's where the self doubt creeps in.
mm.
A lot of times people believe that they're writing the wrong project. And this is something I deal with all the time. I'm always like, oh, I should be writing a different book. But that's kind of why I started working with a coach and why I became a coach. Like, you have to decide every book that you start working on is the right one, and then you follow through because
Yeah,
that teaches you the discipline and makes you a better writer, which ultimately gives you a better career. So it's like doing the work. So a lot of it is just sticking in the middle and then getting to the other side and then going through it again. Once you get the agent, then you have to go and find an editor who will buy the book. If you self-publish, a lot of people feel like that's easier and that's a shortcut, but it's the same process with yourself. You're like, oh,
Mm.
it's going to be amazing. And then you put it out there and you get your first 1-star Amazon review and you feel like all hope is lost. And it's just this process. So I help people really look long term. Like, where do you want to be? Let's focus on that, because that is going to help you have the psychological momentum to keep going throughout this so you actually get there.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. Well, and I think a book, especially, I would say especially fiction, but I would think probably any book, because it's
Yeah.
such a huge project. It's such like
Yep.
this leap of faith. You do all this work with the hope that
Yes.
somebody will buy it, with the hope that, it will take off. Um, and you get so attached to it and so involved in it. It's like
Yeah.
putting your baby out in the world and then somebody's like, your baby's ugly. You're like,
Yes.
what?
Not my baby. It's so subjective. And then there are the little tricks of the trade. Like, I just have a black belt in query letters. I know how to write query letters in a way that almost all of the ones I write to sell my own books end up on the jacket copy. That's just like my specialty. So I can give you, there is a formula to it. Yes, there's your own talent, but there's also, what do you need to have in there to sell this book? So
Wow.
things
Yeah.
like that, where I'm like, I can give you concrete ways to do this. But if you have a crappy attitude, and you might not even know you have a crappy attitude, then
Hmm.
it's going to be a lot harder. It's going to take a lot longer. So yeah, it's a shortcut.
Oh, fantastic. All right. So if you are watching this and you also believe that you can make money writing and you want to learn more, Camille, how can viewers get in touch with you?
So I'm at CamillePagan.com or CamillePaganCoaching.com. Yeah. And all of my contact information's on there.
All right. And I know you're also on Instagram because I follow you out there. So
Yeah.
got a
Camille
lot
Pagan
about your
Books.
fiction out there
Yeah.
as well. So, yep. And so if you don't want to write a book, you just want to read one, you can check those out as well. And if you want to learn more about mindset and money and all things related to that, you can come to my free Facebook group. LisaDuke.net/Money Club is the shortcut that will get you there. Or if you're already on Facebook, just search for Money Club with Lisa Duke. Make sure you find the one that I'm in, because there's some other stuff that's not the same thing. some kind of weird stuff. I did not invent the idea of Money Club. So yeah, so join me out there, and make sure that you subscribe, you hit the like, you hit the bell, you hit all the things so that other folks can find these videos and you can find them in the future as well. I drop a video every Wednesday early morning US time. So be looking for that, and thank you for tuning in. Bye.
Thanks, Lisa.